April 5, 1933. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signs Executive Order 6102. Effective immediately, every American citizen is required by law to surrender their gold. Gold coins, gold bars, gold certificates, all of it, to the government by May 1st. The penalty for non-compliance? A $10,000 fine, 10 years in federal prison. Not for robbery, not for fraud, for owning the gold you already owned. This is not a story from a distant dictatorship. This happened in the United States of America, 89 years before Bitcoin, 91 years before the national debt hit $34 trillion, and almost nobody talks about it. This is Black Box Markets. Let's open the black box. To understand what Roosevelt did in 1933, you first have to understand what gold meant to the American economy. At the time, the United States was on the gold standard. Every dollar in circulation was backed by gold. If you held a dollar bill and walked into a bank, the bank was legally required to exchange it for gold. The dollar was not just a piece of paper, it was a receipt, a claim on real metal sitting in a vault. This arrangement had kept the dollar stable for decades, but it also created a fundamental constraint. The government could only create as much money as it had gold to back it. In normal times, that constraint was a feature, not a bug. It prevented inflation. It maintained trust. In a depression, it became a cage. By 1933, the Great Depression had been grinding America down for 4 years. Unemployment had reached 25%. 1 in 4 Americans had no job. Thousands of banks had failed. Farmers were losing their land. Factories sat empty. And the gold standard was making it worse. Here is the mechanism. When scared Americans rushed to banks to withdraw their savings, many demanded gold instead of paper dollars. Gold started flowing out of bank vaults, out of the Federal Reserve, and some of it was flowing out of the country entirely, as foreign governments and investors converted their dollar holdings to gold before the United States ran out. As the gold supply shrank, the money supply shrank with it. Less gold meant fewer dollars. Fewer dollars meant less spending, less lending, less investment. The economy was being strangled by the very system designed to stabilize it. Roosevelt had just been inaugurated. He had promised Americans a New Deal. To deliver it, he needed to spend, massively. To spend, he needed to print money. To print money, he needed to break the gold standard. But first, he needed the gold. On April 5, 1933, just 32 days after taking office, Roosevelt declared a national emergency. Executive Order 6102 required all persons in the United States to deliver all gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve by May 1, 1933. In return, they would receive $20.67 per troy ounce, the official government price. Take it or leave it. If you left it, if you kept your gold, you faced a $10,000 fine, roughly $240,000 in today's money, and 10 years in federal prison. The order applied to everyone, individuals, businesses, corporations. Even banks were required to surrender their excess gold to the Federal Reserve. Compliance was widespread, not because most Americans agreed with the order, but because they were afraid. The banking system had just collapsed around them. The president had declared a bank holiday, shutting every bank in America for days. People were already scared. When the government came for your gold, most people handed it over. But not everyone. Some Americans refused. A New York attorney named Frederick Barber Campbell tried to withdraw his gold from a bank. The bank, following federal orders, refused to give it to him. He sued. He won on a technicality at first. The order had been signed by Roosevelt, not by the Secretary of the Treasury, as the Trading with the Enemy Act required. The government reissued the order correctly, and Campbell was later indicted. The authority held. Others simply hid their gold. They buried it, concealed it in walls, sent it to relatives in other countries. But most Americans complied, and within weeks, hundreds of millions of dollars in gold had flowed from private hands into the vaults of the Federal Reserve. There was one exception. Gold coins with, and I'm quoting the order directly here, recognized special value to collectors of rare or unusual coins. In other words, rare and collectible gold coins did not have to be surrendered. Who had collections of rare gold coins? The wealthy. While working-class Americans were required to hand over their small savings, the few coins they had set aside, the gold their parents had left them, the upper class retained their gold through a legal exemption that only they could afford to use. The black box, as always, has two doors, one for most people, one for everyone else. Here is the part of this story that textbooks rarely teach. Remember, Americans were paid $20.67 per ounce of gold. That was the government's official price, non-negotiable. Within 8 months of the gold confiscation, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. The new official price of gold, $35 per ounce. Let that land. The government had collected your gold at $20.67 an ounce, then revalued that gold at $35 an ounce, an increase of 69% overnight. The profit on that revaluation went directly to the Treasury, billions of dollars, created from nothing by changing a number on a piece of paper. That money funded the New Deal, the public works programs, the social safety nets, the government spending that Roosevelt said would lift America out of the Depression. It did, partially, eventually, but the wealth that funded it had been transferred from private American citizens to the federal government through a mandatory exchange, at a price the government itself had set. And then the government raised the price, after they had everyone's gold. There is one more layer to this. The $35 per ounce price that Roosevelt set in 1934 became the foundation of the entire post-World War II global financial system. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the United States negotiated an agreement with 44 allied nations. The US dollar would become the world's reserve currency, and every other currency would be pegged to the dollar, which was pegged to gold, at $35 an ounce. The dollar was now the backbone of the global economy, and the gold backing it had been collected from American citizens at a price decided by the government, before the government raised its value by 69%. For 37 years, the deal held. The dollar backed by gold, the world backed by the dollar. Then, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on television and quietly ended the arrangement. The United States, he said, was suspending temporarily the convertibility of the dollar to gold. Temporarily. It has now been 54 years. With the last link between the dollar and gold severed, the United States, and by extension the entire world, moved to a system of pure fiat currency. Money backed by nothing except the promise of the government that issued it. Since 1971, the US dollar has lost more than 85% of its purchasing power. The national debt has grown from roughly $400 billion to over $34 trillion. Whether that is the result of removing the gold constraint or other forces is a debate economists have not yet resolved. But here is what is not debated. In 1933, the government took your gold. In 1934, it revalued that gold at a 69% profit. In 1944, it used that gold to make the dollar the world's reserve currency. In 1971, it removed the gold backing entirely. And it was not until 1975, 42 years after the confiscation, that Americans were legally allowed to own gold again. Your dollar, right now, is backed by the word of the government that printed it. The gold that once backed it was taken in 1933. The link was cut in 1971. That is not an opinion, that is the mechanism. That is the black box. Subscribe if you want to keep opening them. Next time we leave the United States entirely, we go to a country that once had the highest standard of living in South America. A country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. A country that, within 2 generations, went from being called the Saudi Arabia of the West to the site of the largest refugee crisis in the history of the Western Hemisphere. The story of Venezuela, how it rose, how it fell, and who, from inside and outside its borders, played a role in both. That story is next.